You could not live with your own failure. Where did that bring you? Back to me.
Yep, we're all kinds of stubborn.
Sword Art Online fans love to say the franchise doesn't need defending. According to them, the series already has a great reputation. The hate died years ago, and anyone still defending it is just beating a dead horse. They also argue that rebuttal videos are pointless because critics have already made up their minds. If the haters aren't going to change their opinion, why waste time arguing with them? But the moment someone criticizes Sword Art Online, that entire philosophy disappears. Suddenly, the same people saying ignore the hate are making response videos, writing essays, and arguing in comment sections about why every critic is wrong. So which is it? If Sword Art Online truly doesn't need defending, then let it stand on its own. If rebuttal content is really pointless, then stop making rebuttal content. You can't tell everyone else to ignore criticism while constantly responding to it yourself. That's the exact opposite of ignoring it. The irony is that many of these fans don't actually believe rebuttals are useless. They only think they're useless when other people make them. When they're the ones uploading defense videos, suddenly it's setting the record straight, correcting misinformation, or protecting the franchise. The standard changes depending on who's speaking. At some point, you have to pick a position and stick with it. Either criticism should be ignored or it should be answered. Either the franchise doesn't need defending or it does. You can't spend years telling people that response videos accomplish nothing while building your own content around responding to criticism. That makes the defenders look hypocritical.
Liars. Hypocrites.
That's what this video is about. The new Sword Art Online game has become the latest example of this never-ending cycle.
It never ends.
The game launches, players point out its flaws, negative reviews start piling up, and instead of accepting that the game has serious problems, the fans immediately jump into damage control mode. Suddenly, it's not the game's fault anymore. It's the reviewer's fault. For a franchise that supposedly doesn't need defending, it sure seems to have an endless supply of people rushing to defend it.
The very first response tells the reviewer to quit your whining. First of all, it's hard to take a comment seriously when it can't even use the correct "your." If you're going to lecture someone, at least get basic grammar right. But grammar aside, this is just a weak and pathetic response. Notice what the commenter doesn't do. They don't address a single criticism. They don't explain why the reviewer is wrong. They don't defend the game's mechanics, the level design, the combat, or the pricing. They don't offer a counter-argument of any kind. Instead, they immediately jump to quit your whining. That's not a rebuttal. That's a dismissal. The reviewer paid for the game. They spent their own money, invested their own time, played it, and shared their opinion. That's literally the purpose of a review. Reviews exist so people can explain what they liked and what they didn't like to help other consumers make informed decisions. So why exactly should they quit whining? Because they didn't enjoy a product they paid $70 for? Because they expected more from a franchise they love? Because they expressed disappointment instead of blind praise? That's not whining. That's consumer feedback. People seem to forget that freedom of speech doesn't only apply to opinions they agree with. If someone thinks the game is a masterpiece, they're free to say that. If someone thinks it's a repetitive, overpriced disappointment, they're equally free to say that. Neither opinion needs permission from random strangers on the internet. What's really telling is that comments like this never engage with the substance of the criticism. That's because insults require far less effort than arguments. If someone writes a detailed review explaining why they dislike the game, the mature response is to explain why you disagree. Maybe you had a different experience. Maybe you enjoyed the combat more. Maybe you think the story gets better later. Those are actual discussion points. Quit your whining contributes absolutely nothing. It's essentially saying, I don't like your opinion, so stop talking. That's not how discussion works. And honestly, if your first instinct whenever someone criticizes a game is to tell them to be quiet instead of engaging with what they actually said, it makes it look like you don't have a real defense for the game in the first place. A strong game doesn't need its critics silenced. It can withstand criticism because people can point to its strengths. When your response is simply, stop whining, you're not defending the game. You're just trying to shut down a conversation you don't like. And here's something else that's really interesting. You almost exclusively see these kinds of comments under negative reviews. Go look at a glowing review where someone says, this game is amazing. 10 out of 10. Best Sword Art Online game ever made. You almost never see people jumping into the replies saying, quit your praising. Stop complimenting the game. You're just glazing. Nobody cares that you liked it. It almost never happens. But the moment someone posts a negative review explaining why they didn't enjoy the game, suddenly they're whining. They're crying. They're hating. They're being too negative. Why is that? If the goal is supposedly to encourage honest opinions, then both positive and negative reviews should be treated the same way. People should be free to explain why they love the game just as much as someone else should be free to explain why they hated it. Instead, there seems to be a double standard. Positive reviews are welcomed because they reinforce what defenders already believe. Negative reviews, on the other hand, are often dismissed before anyone even engages with the actual arguments being made. That's not an interest in discussion. That's an interest in protecting a narrative. If someone spends several paragraphs explaining why the exploration feels restrictive, why the combat becomes repetitive, or why the game isn't worth $70, the response shouldn't be, "Quit whining." It should be, "Here's why I disagree." That's how actual conversations work. The fact that these dismissive comments almost always appear under negative reviews says a lot. It suggests that some people aren't bothered by reviews in general. They're only bothered by reviews that criticize something they like. And that's a completely different thing. If you're comfortable with people publicly praising a game, then you should be equally comfortable with people publicly criticizing it. Reviews go both ways. You don't get to celebrate freedom of opinion when someone agrees with you and then suddenly label it whining the moment they don't. If positive opinions deserve to be heard, then negative opinions deserve the exact same respect. If anything, people should be criticizing garbage games like this even more. Because if players stop speaking up, what incentive does the publisher have to improve? Think about it. If a company can release a game that a large number of players consider unfinished, repetitive, and overpriced, and nobody pushes back, then why would they spend more time, money, or effort on the next one? From a business standpoint, there's no reason to. Constructive criticism is one of the few ways consumers can communicate that a product didn't meet expectations. It's how developers and publishers learn what players actually want. Whether they choose to listen is another story, but if nobody says anything, the message they receive is simple. Keep doing what you're doing. That's exactly how bad franchises stay bad. When fans rush to dismiss every complaint as whining, they're not protecting the series. They're lowering the bar for what they're willing to accept. They're sending the message that it's okay to release a game with repetitive content, restrictive exploration, technical issues, and a premium price tag because someone will defend it anyway. That doesn't benefit players. It benefits the publisher. If you genuinely want better Sword Art Online games, then criticism isn't the problem. It's part of the solution. Companies improve when customers make it clear that something wasn't good enough. They don't improve because everyone stays quiet and pretends everything is fine. The worst thing a community can do is normalize trash. Every time someone says, "Stop complaining," they're essentially telling people to accept the product as it is. And if enough people adopt that mindset, don't be surprised when the next game launches with the same problems, the same shortcuts, and the same lack of ambition. Publishers pay attention to sales, reviews, and player feedback. If the feedback is overwhelmingly positive regardless of quality, they're far less likely to rethink their approach. So no, I don't think people should criticize less. If anything, they should be more vocal. Consumers are the ones paying for these games. They have every right to demand a product that justifies its price. If a $70 game fails to deliver, people shouldn't be shamed for saying so. They should make their dissatisfaction loud and clear. Because if they don't, all that's going to happen is the cycle repeats itself, and we're right back here a few years from now talking about another disappointing Sword Art Online game that could have been so much better. Whenever I see stupid comments telling people to stop criticizing something, it honestly has the opposite effect on me. It doesn't make me think, you know what? Maybe I should stay quiet. It makes me want to criticize it even more. Not because I enjoy being negative, but because that kind of attitude is so fundamentally backwards. Criticism isn't something that needs permission. People don't lose their right to voice an opinion just because someone else is tired of hearing it. If someone spends their own money on a product and walks away disappointed, they're entitled to explain why. That's how consumer feedback works. What really annoys me is when people act as though criticism itself is the problem instead of addressing the criticism. Rather than discussing whether the complaints are accurate, they immediately jump to stop complaining, move on, or nobody cares. Why? If the criticism is wrong, then explain why it's wrong. If it's exaggerated, point out what's being exaggerated. If you had a different experience, share it. That's how discussions are supposed to work. Trying to shut people up because you don't like what they're saying doesn't strengthen your position. If anything, it makes it look like you're afraid of the conversation. And the more I see people trying to police what others are allowed to say about a game, the more it convinces me that the criticism should continue. Not because criticism should go on forever for the sake of it, but because nobody gets to decide that a topic is off limits simply because it makes them uncomfortable. If a game deserves praise, people will praise it. If it deserves criticism, people will criticize it. That's how every form of entertainment has always worked. The idea that everyone should suddenly stop talking about a game's flaws because a few fans are tired of hearing them is ridiculous. If you don't want to read criticism, nobody is forcing you to click on it. But telling everyone else to stop expressing their opinions isn't going to make those opinions disappear. If anything, it just motivates more people to speak up because nobody likes being told they aren't allowed to criticize a product they paid for. The irony here is honestly hilarious. This defender is telling the reviewer to quit whining, yet they're doing the exact same thing. Instead of simply disagreeing and moving on, they felt the need to jump into the comments and complain about someone else's opinion. That's whining too. If their own logic is supposed to apply, then why not turn it right back around on them? Quit your whining. If negative reviews bother you so much, take your own advice and ignore them. Nobody forced you to click on a review. Nobody forced you to read it. Nobody forced you to write a response complaining that someone else criticized a video game. That's what makes comments like this so ridiculous. They act as if criticism is somehow unacceptable, while simultaneously complaining about the criticism. They don't realize they're guilty of the exact behavior they're condemning. Apparently, it's only whining when someone says something negative about a game they like. The moment they start complaining about the reviewer, suddenly that's perfectly justified. It's a double standard that completely falls apart after about 5 seconds of thought. If criticizing a game counts as whining, then criticizing someone for criticizing a game is also whining. You don't get to complain about other people complaining and then pretend you're somehow above it. You're doing the exact same thing, just from the opposite side. The next offenders pull out one of the oldest excuses in gaming. You've only played a few hours. Most of that was just the tutorial, so your opinion doesn't count. Seriously? That's such a weak defense. People don't have to finish an entire game before they're allowed to decide whether they're enjoying it. If the first several hours are boring, repetitive, or frustrating, that's part of the game. Those hours don't magically stop counting just because someone says it gets better later. First impressions matter. In fact, they're some of the most important parts of any game because they're responsible for convincing players to keep going. If a game fails to hook people in its opening hours, that's the developer's fault, not the players. Imagine go to a restaurant and ordering a steak. The first bite is cold. The second bite tastes terrible. The third bite isn't any better. You call the waiter over and say, "I'm really not enjoying this." Then someone at the next table leans over and says, "Well, you can't have an opinion until you've eaten the entire steak." That would be ridiculous. Nobody thinks that way. If the meal is bad from the beginning, you're perfectly justified in saying it's bad. You shouldn't have to force yourself to finish the entire plate just to earn the right to leave a review. Games aren't any different. If someone spends 3, 4, or 5 hours playing a game and they're bored the entire time, that's a perfectly valid experience. Those hours are part of the product they paid for. And let's not forget, people keep bringing up the tutorial as if it somehow doesn't count. Why wouldn't it count? The tutorial is still part of the game. The opening story is still part of the game. The prologue is still part of the game. The developers chose to make players spend those hours there. They designed it, wrote it, and shipped it as part of the final product. If players think it's tedious, then that's a legitimate criticism. You don't get to pretend. Those hours don't exist simply because they're inconvenient to your argument. And where exactly is the cutoff? 5 hours? 10 hours? 20? How much time does someone have to spend before they're finally granted permission to have an opinion? The goalposts always seem to move. If someone quits after 2 hours, they're told they didn't play enough. If they quit after 10 hours, they're told they should have finished the story. If they finish the game, they're told they rushed through it or weren't paying attention. At some point, it becomes obvious that no amount of playtime is ever going to satisfy people who simply don't want to accept criticism. The reality is much simpler. If a game can't convince someone to keep playing after several hours, then that's a problem with the game, not the player. A well-designed game shouldn't require people to endure hours of boredom before they're finally allowed to have fun. It should make a strong impression from the start. And if it doesn't, people have every right to say so. These are the same kinds of people who will unironically tell you, the game gets good after 100 hours. Think about how absurd that sounds. Why does it take 100 hours for a game to become enjoyable? Why not just make it good from the beginning? Why is that such a controversial concept? Imagine recommending a movie by saying, yeah, the first hour is terrible, but trust me, bro, it gets amazing during the last 5 minutes. Or recommending a TV show by saying, the first 3 seasons are boring, but season 4 is incredible. Most people would laugh at that recommendation. Yet somehow, when it comes to certain games, people act like it's perfectly reasonable to expect players to slog through dozens upon dozens of hours before they're finally allowed to have fun. No, that's terrible game design. A game should be trying to hook you immediately. The opening hours should be some of the strongest because they're what convince people to stick around. They introduce the world, the mechanics, the story, and the gameplay loop. If those first impressions are boring, repetitive, or frustrating, most players are naturally going to walk away. And they should. Nobody owes a game 100 hours of their life just to discover whether it eventually becomes enjoyable. Time is valuable. People have jobs, school, families, other hobbies, thousands of other games competing for their attention. If your game can't grab people within the first few hours, don't blame the audience when they decide to spend their time somewhere else. Even if, for the sake of argument, the game suddenly transformed into the greatest RPG ever made after 100 hours, it wouldn't change the fact that most players would never reach that point because the beginning failed to keep them interested. You've already lost them. That's the developer's responsibility, not the players. Games aren't graded solely on their ending. They're judged as complete experiences from beginning to end. If the opening 10, 20, or 30 hours are a chore, then those hours still count. They don't magically disappear because someone insists the payoff comes later. A great game respects the player's time. A bad game expects the player to earn the privilege of eventually enjoying it. There's a huge difference. If your defense of a game starts with, just wait another 50 hours, you've already admitted the problem. And here's the funniest part about this whole exchange. The defender doesn't actually debunk a single criticism. Not one. They don't explain why the reviewer is wrong about the exploration. They don't explain why the combat is supposedly deeper than it appears. They don't justify the $70 price tag. They don't argue that the world isn't repetitive or that the AI is actually competent. None of that. Instead, they go after the reviewer. That's a classic ad hominem. Rather than responding to the argument itself, they try to discredit the person making it. It's much easier to attack the reviewer than it is to address the actual points being raised. If someone writes a detailed review listing 10 different problems with the game, the mature response is to go through those points one by one and explain why you disagree. Maybe you enjoyed the combat more. Maybe you thought the story was engaging. Maybe you felt the exploration was good enough. Those are all legitimate counterarguments. But that's not what happens here. The criticism is ignored entirely, and the conversation immediately becomes about the reviewer instead of the review. That's usually a sign that someone doesn't have much of a rebuttal. Think about it. If someone tells you a restaurant served them cold food, terrible service, and an undercooked meal, the response shouldn't be, well, you're just a complainer. It should be, actually, I had a different experience because... The discussion should stay focused on the product. Instead, defenders like this shift the focus onto the person giving the criticism. Suddenly it's about how much they played, what kind of gamer they are, whether they're a real fan, or whether they're just looking for things to complain about. None of those things answer the original criticism. They're distractions. And it's a pattern you see over and over again whenever people get emotionally attached to a franchise. Rather than asking whether the criticism has merit, they instinctively try to discredit the person making it. But here's the thing. Even if you think the reviewer is annoying, even if you think they're overly negative, even if you don't like their writing style, that still doesn't prove their criticisms are wrong. The exploration is either restrictive or it isn't. The combat is either engaging or it isn't. The world is either immersive or it isn't. Those points stand or fall on their own merits. Attacking the reviewer doesn't magically make the game's problems disappear. If anything, it makes the defense look even weaker because it suggests the easiest response isn't to defend the game at all. It's to attack the person criticizing it. And that's not a defense. That's an admission that you'd rather change the subject than confront the criticism head-on. One thing that's absolutely hilarious is how the defenders weaponize playtime, depending on whatever is convenient for them. If someone leaves a negative review after playing 2 or 3 hours, the response is always the same. You barely played the game. You didn't give it a chance. You quit before it got good. Apparently, your opinion is invalid because you haven't suffered through enough of the game. But then someone puts in 20 hours, or 30, or even 50. Suddenly the argument changes. Well, if the game was so bad, why did you keep playing? So which is it? Did they not play enough? Or did they play too much? It seems like there's no amount of playtime that's ever acceptable to these people. If you refund the game after a few hours, you didn't experience enough. If you stick with it because you genuinely wanted it to improve, you're told, well, you obviously liked it enough to keep playing. It's a completely contradictory argument designed so the defender can never lose. No matter how many hours someone has, there's always another excuse waiting. And let's be honest, people don't always keep playing because they're having fun. Sometimes they're hoping it gets better. Sometimes they spent $70 and want to get their money's worth. Sometimes they're trying to give the game every possible chance before writing a review. And sometimes they're reviewing it professionally or simply want to reach the end before forming a final opinion. None of that means they enjoyed the experience. If anything, someone who's stuck with the game for dozens of hours has an even stronger foundation for criticizing it because they've experienced far more of what it has to offer. But defenders don't see it that way. Instead, playtime becomes a moving target. Too little? Your opinion doesn't count. Too much? Well, clearly you must have liked it. It's impossible to win because the goal isn't to have an honest discussion. The goal is to find any reason, no matter how contradictory, to dismiss criticism. That's why these arguments fall apart the moment you think about them for more than a few seconds. The amount of time someone played doesn't automatically determine whether their opinion is valid. What matters is whether the criticism itself is accurate. If someone says the exploration is restrictive, then address the exploration. If they say the combat becomes repetitive, then explain why you disagree. If they think the game isn't worth $70, explain why you think it is. That's how you debate a review. Trying to invalidate someone's opinion based solely on the number of hours on their Steam profile isn't a rebuttal. It's just another excuse to avoid talking about the game itself. And of course, it wouldn't be a controversial game launch without someone claiming that every negative review is written by bots. Apparently, that's the new excuse. If the reviews are positive, they're real. If the reviews are negative, they're bots. Convenient, isn't it? It's honestly one of the laziest responses you can make because it lets you dismiss criticism without having to engage with any of it. Instead of reading what people are actually saying, you just slap the word bot on every review you don't like and move on. That's not an argument. It's a coping mechanism. The funniest part is that these reviews aren't just one-line comments saying, game bad. Many of them are several paragraphs long. They go into detail about the combat, the exploration, the AI, the story, the controls, the progression, the performance, and the pricing. They explain exactly what disappointed them and why they came away feeling let down. Are we seriously supposed to believe thousands of words of detailed criticism are all being generated by some army of bots? Come on. And here's another thing. A lot of these reviews come from people who openly say they're longtime Sword Art Online fans. They talk about watching the anime, reading the light novels, playing previous SAO games, and waiting years for a game that finally captures the feeling of Aincrad. Those aren't random people trying to sabotage the franchise. They're customers. They're the exact audience Bandai Namco wanted to sell this game to. Calling them bots because they didn't like the final product is just ridiculous. It's easier to pretend there's some conspiracy than it is to admit that a lot of real players simply weren't impressed. That's what this really comes down to. Some people would rather believe that thousands of negative opinions are fake than accept the possibility that the game genuinely disappointed a large number of players. At that point, you've stopped evaluating the game honestly. You're just looking for excuses to ignore criticism. And if your first instinct whenever you see a negative review is to shout, "Bot," you've already made up your mind before reading a single word. That's not skepticism. That's denial. At a certain point, you have to call it what it is. These people are living in denial. When the same criticisms keep appearing over and over again from different players on different platforms, and for people with completely different backgrounds, eventually you have to acknowledge that there might be something to those complaints. You don't have to agree with every negative review, but pretending they're all invalid simply because you like the franchise isn't an honest way to evaluate the game. That's what makes this so frustrating to watch. Instead of accepting that the game has obvious flaws, some people seem determined to explain away every criticism imaginable. If someone didn't enjoy the game, they didn't play enough. If they refunded it, they weren't real fans. If they left a detailed review, they're just whining. If there are lots of negative reviews, they're suddenly bots. No matter what evidence is presented, there's always another excuse waiting. That's not defending a game based on its strengths. That's refusing to accept reality. A good game doesn't need this level of damage control. When a game is genuinely great, people naturally recommend it because they had a good experience. They don't have to invent reasons why every dissatisfied customer is somehow wrong. The product speaks for itself. This game doesn't seem to have that luxury, which is why so many discussions end up revolving around dismissing critics instead of celebrating the game itself. At some point, you have to stop blaming everyone else. If thousands of players are independently arriving at similar conclusions about repetitive gameplay, restrictive exploration, weak AI, and a disappointing overall experience, maybe the problem isn't the players. Maybe the game simply didn't deliver. Ignoring that reality doesn't make the criticism disappear. It just makes the people denying it look increasingly disconnected from what everyone else is seeing. And here's another defender making the exact same tired argument. According to them, the reviewer didn't even make it past the tutorial. Except they did. They played beyond it. They experienced the game after the prologue, spent enough time with the core gameplay loop, and ultimately decided it wasn't getting any better. That's the part these defenders conveniently ignore. They act as if the reviewer quit 2 minutes after launching the game, when that's simply not what happened. The reviewer gave the game a chance, got through the opening section, experienced what the game actually had to offer, and reached the conclusion that it wasn't worth continuing. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. Not every player is going to keep sinking hours into a game that's already failed to impress them. And why should they? Games are supposed to be entertaining, not endurance tests. If you've already played enough to understand the gameplay loop, the pacing, the exploration, the combat, and the overall direction of the game, you're more than capable of deciding whether it's something you want to continue. You don't need to force yourself through another 10, 20, or 30 hours just to earn permission to say you didn't enjoy it. What makes this defense even weaker is that it completely sidesteps the reviewer's actual criticisms. Notice how they don't explain why the exploration supposedly becomes more engaging. They don't argue that the combat suddenly transforms into something revolutionary. They don't point to some dramatic shift in enemy variety or level design. Instead, they focus entirely on how far the reviewer played, as if playtime alone magically determines whether criticism is valid. It doesn't. If someone can already see the direction the game is headed and decides they don't like it, that's a legitimate conclusion. In fact, that's exactly what reviews are for. People don't have unlimited free time. If a game has already convinced you after several hours that it's repetitive, restrictive, or simply not fun, walking away is a completely rational decision. The idea that you're obligated to keep playing a game you're no longer enjoying just so strangers on the internet will finally acknowledge your opinion is ridiculous. And that's what makes these comments so frustrating. They aren't defending the game. They're defending the amount of time they think someone should be required to spend before they're allowed to criticize it. Those are two very different things. Instead of addressing the reviewer's points, they invent a narrative that the reviewer didn't really play the game, even when the review itself makes it obvious they experienced enough to understand exactly what kind of game it was. At some point, you have to accept that people don't need to finish an entire game to know it isn't for them. If the core gameplay hasn't clicked after several hours, it's perfectly reasonable to conclude that it's probably not going to. And the reason defenders like this almost never address the reviewer's actual points is pretty simple. They don't have a counterargument. Think about it. If someone writes a review explaining that the exploration is restrictive, the enemy variety is repetitive, the AI is weak, the world feels lifeless, and the game isn't worth $70, there are only two ways to respond. You can either explain why those criticisms are wrong, or you can ignore them. Time and time again, these defenders choose the second option. They don't explain why the exploration is supposedly more open than players are saying. They don't explain why fighting the same handful of enemies over and over somehow isn't repetitive. They don't explain why the AI constantly getting stuck or standing around doing nothing isn't a problem. They don't explain why the game deserves a premium $70 price tag, because they can't. So instead of defending the game, they attack the person criticizing it. Suddenly, the discussion isn't about the game's flaws anymore. It's about how the reviewer didn't play enough, or they're just whining, or they're not a real fan, or they're looking for reasons to hate the game. Notice what happened there. The conversation shifted completely away from the product. That's not an accident. It's much easier to attack a person's credibility than it is to defend a weak product. If someone actually had convincing rebuttals, they'd use them. They'd explain why the reviewer misunderstood the mechanics. They'd point out content the reviewer overlooked. They'd provide examples showing why the criticism isn't accurate. That's what people do when they have confidence in the product they're defending. Instead, all you get are personal attacks and excuses. That's incredibly telling. Because if the game were truly as amazing as these defenders claim, they wouldn't need to spend all their time criticizing the reviewer. They'd be talking about the game. They'd be highlighting its strengths. They'd be explaining why the exploration is rewarding, why the combat evolves, why the story pays off, or why the world is immersive. But that's rarely what happens. Instead, the reviewer becomes the target. And that's usually a sign that the defender has run out of arguments before the discussion even begins. It's one of the oldest tricks in the book. When you can't defend the message, attack the messenger. That strategy might make the defender feel like they won the argument, but it doesn't actually refute a single criticism. The repetitive enemies don't disappear because you accuse someone of not playing enough. The $70 price tag doesn't magically become justified because you question someone's credibility. The game's flaws are still there. All you've done is avoid talking about them. And that's exactly why these kind of comments are so unconvincing. They spend far more time trying to discredit the reviewer than they do trying to prove the reviewer is actually wrong. If your best defense of a game is attacking the person reviewing it instead of defending the game itself, you've already lost the argument. And of course, we've reached the next stage of denial. Apparently, every negative review was written by ChatGPT. Of course it was, because that's the easiest excuse in the world. If the review is positive, it's genuine. If the review is negative, suddenly it's AI, or it's a bot, or it's review bombing, or it's part of some coordinated hate campaign. Funny how that works. It's incredibly convenient because it means you never have to actually read what the reviewer wrote. You don't have to respond to their points. You don't have to explain why they're wrong. You just wave your hand, say, "That's AI," and move on. Problem solved. Except it isn't. A lot of these reviews are detailed. They reference specific mechanics, specific bosses, specific quests, specific progression systems, specific frustrations, and specific moments that happened during their playthroughs. They describe why they refunded the game, why they stopped playing, and what disappointed them after hours of experience. Those aren't just generic comments saying, game bad. They're actual reviews from people explaining their experience. But apparently none of that matters because someone decided they must have been written by ChatGPT. It's such a lazy way to dismiss criticism. And it's also incredibly insulting to the people who took the time to write those reviews. Imagine spending hours with a game, writing a detailed explanation of why you didn't enjoy it, only for someone to immediately respond, "Nice ChatGPT review." They don't address a single point you made. They don't explain why you're wrong. They don't offer a different perspective. They just pretend your opinion isn't even your own. That's not an argument. That's denial. And then there's the irony. The people making these accusations never have any evidence. They don't point out factual inaccuracies. They don't demonstrate that the review was AI generated. They simply assume that because they don't like the conclusion, the review couldn't possibly have been written by a real person. That's an incredible leap in logic. Apparently, it's easier to believe there's an army of AI-generated reviews than it is to accept that a lot of real customers simply didn't enjoy the game. And that's what this really comes down to. Some defenders seem completely unwilling to accept that other people can genuinely dislike something they enjoy. So instead of acknowledging that possibility, they invent an alternate reality where every negative opinion is fake. Every critic is a bot. Every detailed review is ChatGPT. Every disappointed customer is part of some conspiracy. Anyone except an actual player. It's honestly one of the weakest defenses imaginable because it doesn't engage with the criticism in any meaningful way. It's just another attempt to explain away feedback instead of confronting it. The reality is much simpler. Sometimes people just don't like a game, and no amount of shouting AI is going to change that. And let's say, just for the sake of argument, that a reviewer did use AI to help write their review. So what? Why does that suddenly make their opinion invalid? There's a huge difference between using AI to help organize your thoughts and having AI invent an experience you never had. If someone played the game themselves, formed their own opinion, and then used an AI writing tool to make their review more readable or fix their grammar, the opinion is still theirs. The AI didn't play the game. The person did. The AI didn't decide the combat was repetitive. The player did. The AI didn't refund the game. The player did. The AI didn't spend hours running from objective to objective. The player experienced that firsthand. All AI may have done is help present those thoughts more clearly. That's not fundamentally different from using spell check, Grammarly, or asking a friend to proofread what you wrote. The actual experience still belongs to the player. What's especially funny is how selective this criticism is. Nobody accuses positive reviews of being written by AI. It's always the negative ones. If someone posts a glowing review saying the game is amazing, defenders don't usually jump in demanding proof that a human wrote it. But the moment someone criticizes the game, suddenly everyone becomes an AI detective. It's another convenient excuse that allows people to ignore the content of the review instead of responding to it. And here's the irony that makes this whole argument even funnier. This is Sword Art Online we're talking about. A franchise built around artificial intelligence. The series has AI companions, AI NPCs, AI enemies, AI-generated quests, AI-generated skills, and some of its most important characters like Alice and Yui are literally artificial intelligences. Entire story arcs revolve around AI becoming more advanced, more human, and more integrated into everyday life. Yet somehow, the moment someone uses an AI writing assistant to help write a Steam review, it's treated like some unforgivable offense that instantly invalidates everything they said. That's a pretty strange position to take for fans of a series where AI plays such a major role. At the end of the day, what matters isn't whether someone used AI to polish their writing. What matters is whether the criticism is accurate. If someone says the exploration is restrictive, then explain why it's not. If they say the AI companions are frustrating, explain why you disagree. If they think the game isn't worth $70, make the case for why it is. Those are the conversations worth having. Whether someone used AI to help write a paragraph is completely irrelevant to whether the criticism itself is true. Focusing on the writing tool instead of the actual argument is just another way of avoiding the discussion altogether. And with that, I think I'm going to stop here. I'm sure I could keep going if I wanted to. There are probably dozens, if not hundreds, of comments just like these scattered across Steam, YouTube, Reddit, and social media. Every time someone posts a negative opinion about this game, the same handful of defenses seem to appear over and over again. It's like reading the same script on repeat. At a certain point, though, it just becomes exhausting. There's only so many times you can watch people dodge criticism, attack reviewers instead of addressing their arguments, dismiss every negative opinion as AI or bots, and invent excuse after excuse before you realize the conversation isn't going anywhere. The saddest part is that very little of the discussion is actually about the game itself. Instead of explaining why the exploration is fun, why the combat is engaging, or why the $70 price tag is justified, so much of the conversation revolves around discrediting anyone who wasn't impressed. That's not a defense of the game. It's an avoidance of the criticism. And after reading comment after comment, you start to notice the same patterns repeating endlessly. The arguments aren't becoming stronger. They're just being recycled by different people. Honestly, reading through all of this is frustrating because it feels like basic logic gets thrown out the window the moment a favorite franchise is involved. Instead of having a normal discussion where people can disagree about the game's strengths and weaknesses, everything turns into excuses, personal attacks, and moving the goalposts. At some point, you just have to throw your hands up and move on. I've had enough. If these are the kinds of arguments people have to rely on to defend the game, I think they speak for themselves. There's only so much time you can spend reading the same tired excuses before it stops being interesting and starts becoming genuinely painful to sit through. By the end of it all, you're left wondering how so many people can spend so much energy avoiding criticism instead of simply accepting that other players had a different experience. It's not even entertaining after a while. It's just disappointing. One of the funniest contradictions in all of this is how Sword Art Online fans are constantly telling everyone else to just ignore the hate. That's the advice they always give. Stop giving the haters attention. Just ignore them. They're only looking for a reaction. The franchise doesn't need defending. Okay, if you genuinely believe that, then why are you doing the exact opposite? Because this isn't ignoring the criticism. This is engaging with it. This is responding to it. This is arguing with it. This is making videos about it. This is writing paragraphs in comment sections about it. This is spending hours trying to convince strangers they're wrong. That's not ignoring anything. It's the complete opposite. You don't spend your free time replying to something you've ignored. You don't create rebuttal videos about something you've ignored. You don't jump into every comment section to defend a game you've supposedly decided isn't worth defending. The actions simply don't match the words. That's what makes the whole thing so ironic. The same people saying, ignore the hate, are often the first people rushing into the comments the moment someone posts a negative review. If criticism truly didn't matter to them, they wouldn't feel compelled to answer every single piece of it. They'd move on. They'd enjoy the game. They'd let the criticism exist without feeling the need to challenge it. Instead, they do the exact opposite. They actively seek it out. They argue with it. They tell reviewers they're wrong. They accuse them of not playing enough, being fake fans, using AI, being bots, or simply not understanding the game. That isn't ignoring criticism. That's being consumed by it. And the funniest part is that many of these same people insist Sword Art Online doesn't need defending. Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like that's exactly what they're doing. If the series truly didn't need defending, there wouldn't be this constant urge to explain away every negative review or shut down every critical video. People would simply let the game stand on its own merits. A genuinely strong product doesn't need an army of fans running damage control every time someone points out its flaws. The quality speaks for itself. But when the response to criticism becomes a bigger conversation than the game itself, it raises an obvious question. Maybe the problem isn't that people refuse to ignore the hate. Maybe it's that some fans refuse to ignore criticism. There's a big difference. Criticism isn't automatically hate, and responding to every criticism while insisting you're ignoring it is a contradiction that speaks for itself. You can't tell everyone to ignore criticism while spending your own time obsessing over that same criticism. At some point, You have to pick one. Either ignore it or admit that you're defending the franchise. Because try and claim you're doing both at the same time just isn't believable. At this point, I think the reason some defenders react so strongly is fairly obvious. For some people, Sword Art Online isn't just another series they enjoy. It has become a major part of how they see themselves online. They've spent years discussing it, recommending it, making content about it, and defending it in conversations. When you've invested that much time and emotion into a franchise, it's easy for criticism of the series to start feeling more personal than it really is. The problem is that criticism of a piece of media isn't the same thing as criticism of the people who enjoy it. Someone can dislike a game without saying anything about the fans as individuals. Someone can think the game is disappointing without saying that everyone who bought it has bad taste. Those are two completely different statements. But some defenders don't seem to make that distinction. Instead of hearing, "I think this game has repetitive gameplay and isn't worth $70, they hear, "Your opinion is wrong," or even, "You're wrong for liking it." Once the conversation reaches that point, it stops being about the game. It becomes personal. That's when you start seeing emotional reactions instead of actual counterarguments. Rather than discussing the exploration, the combat, the story, or the price, the focus shifts toward attacking the reviewer, questioning their motives, or trying to discredit their opinion altogether. That's not because those topics are more important. It's because it's often easier to argue with a person than it is to defend a product that has received widespread criticism. If you genuinely enjoy the game, that's perfectly fine. Nobody has to dislike it just because someone else does. But enjoying a game shouldn't mean feeling obligated to challenge every negative opinion you come across. Different people are going to have different experiences, and that's normal. Ironically, the stronger the emotional attachment becomes, the harder it can be to separate criticism of the product from criticism of yourself. That's why some discussions spiral so quickly. Instead of treating the game as something that can be evaluated on its own merits, every negative comment is interpreted as something that has to be answered or corrected. The result is that conversations become less about whether the criticism is accurate and more about defending the franchise at all costs. At the end of the day, this is just a video game. People are free to love it, hate it, or fall somewhere in between. A negative review isn't a personal attack on the fans, and it doesn't need to be treated like one. The healthier approach is to let the game stand on its own merits and let people reach their own conclusions, even if those conclusions are different from yours. One of the biggest contradictions I keep noticing is this. Many of the defenders insist that the criticism doesn't bother them. They'll say the haters are irrelevant, that nobody takes them seriously, and that the franchise is doing just fine regardless of what critics think. If that's really the case, then why spend so much time responding to it? Actions speak louder than words. If someone genuinely doesn't care about criticism, the most natural response is to ignore it and move on. They don't feel compelled to reply to every negative review, argue in every comment section, or make lengthy posts explaining why every critic is supposedly wrong. That's what makes the reaction so interesting. The more energy someone spends trying to dismiss or rebut every criticism, the harder it is to believe that the criticism has no effect on them at all. Now, to be clear, responding to criticism doesn't automatically mean the criticism is correct. People are allowed to disagree and explain why they think a review is unfair. The irony comes from claiming that the criticism is completely meaningless while simultaneously treating it as important enough to respond to over and over again. Those two positions don't fit together very well. If you truly believe the criticism has no impact, then there's no reason to spend hours trying to counter it. If you believe it's worth answering, then you've already acknowledged that it matters enough to engage with. That's why the messaging feels so inconsistent. On one hand, the claim is ignore the hate. On the other hand, there are endless replies, rebuttals, and arguments directed at the very criticism that was supposedly not worth acknowledging. At some point, those actions tell a different story than the words do. Ultimately, a game's reputation isn't decided by who wins the most arguments in a comment section. It's shaped by the experiences players have when they actually sit down and play it. If a game consistently leaves people impressed, positive word of mouth tends to spread naturally. If it consistently disappoints people, criticism tends to spread just as naturally. Arguing with every disappointed player doesn't change the experience they had. It only shifts the conversation away from the game itself and toward the people discussing it. One thing that stands out to me is how some of the loudest defenders seem more interested in protecting the company's reputation than holding it accountable. Instead of demanding a better product, they rush to justify the one they got. That's the exact opposite of what consumers should be doing. If you spend $70 on a game that falls short of expectations, the last thing you should want is for everyone to pretend those problems don't exist. Constructive criticism is one of the few ways developers get clear feedback about what players actually want. When fans immediately dismiss every complaint or attack anyone who leaves a negative review, they're not helping the franchise. They're lowering the standard for what they're willing to accept. What's especially ironic is that many of these defenders claim they're acting out of love for Sword Art Online. If that's true, then shouldn't they want better? Shouldn't they be the first people demanding a richer world, better exploration, more engaging combat, and a game that actually lives up to the potential of Aincrad? Instead, some of them spend more time arguing with disappointed customers than questioning the decisions that led to those customers being disappointed in the first place. That doesn't send a message that fans expect quality. It sends a message that the brand name alone is enough. And that's a dangerous precedent for any franchise. If a publisher sees that fans will defend almost anything simply because it has the Sword Art Online logo on the box, what incentive is there to raise the bar next time? Why take bigger risks? Why invest more time and resources? Why push for something truly exceptional if a significant portion of the audience is willing to make excuses before the game has even earned them? The people criticizing the game aren't necessarily hurting the franchise. In many cases, they're asking for it to be better. They're saying the world should feel more alive. The exploration should be less restrictive. The gameplay should be deeper. The price should match the quality. Those are all criticisms aimed at improving future releases. Ironically, the people trying hardest to silence those criticisms may be doing the franchise no favors in the long run. If every complaint is brushed aside and every disappointed customer is dismissed as a hater, publishers receive less pressure to improve. And when expectations drop, quality often follows. If you're a fan of a series, wanting it to be better isn't betrayal. Pretending it has no problems when it clearly has room for improvement is far less likely to push the franchise in a better direction. One of the funniest contradictions I've seen is when some Sword Art Online fans insist that AI is terrible the moment it's mentioned in the context of a negative review. According to them, if someone used AI to help write a Steam review, that somehow makes the review invalid. It's dismissed as fake, lazy, or not worth reading. Suddenly, AI becomes the ultimate excuse for ignoring criticism. The irony is almost impossible to miss because Sword Art Online is one of the most AI-heavy franchises out there. Artificial intelligence isn't some minor background detail that only appears once or twice. It's one of the central themes of the entire series. The franchise is filled with AI characters, AI companions, AI NPCs, and entire story arcs built around artificial intelligence and the relationship between humans and digital beings. Some of the most important characters in the series are AI, and the story repeatedly asks the audience to care about them as if they were real people. So it's pretty funny to watch some defenders suddenly act like AI is the worst thing ever, when it appears outside the fictional world of Sword Art Online. Inside the anime, AI is fascinating, emotional, and one of the franchise's biggest strengths. Outside the anime, if someone says they used AI to help organize or polish a review, it's apparently an unforgivable offense that means their opinion no longer counts. That's a pretty strange double standard. Even beyond the irony, the argument doesn't make much sense. Using AI to improve the wording of a review doesn't suddenly change the experience the player had. The AI didn't play the game. The AI didn't spend hours running between quest markers. The AI didn't fight repetitive enemies or sit through the long prologue. The player experienced all of that. If they use an AI writing tool to make their thoughts clearer or fix their grammar, the opinion is still based on their own experience. At the end of the day, the real question isn't whether someone used AI to help write a review. The real question is whether the criticism itself is accurate. Does the exploration feel restrictive? Is the combat repetitive? Does the world feel empty? Is the game worth $70? Those are the issues that deserve discussion. Focusing on whether someone used AI to write more clearly is just another way of avoiding the actual arguments. That's what makes this whole debate so ironic. Sword Art Online has spent years celebrating and exploring artificial intelligence as one of its defining concepts. Yet some of its loudest defenders suddenly treat AI as something that automatically invalidates an opinion they don't like. Instead of addressing the criticism, they attack the writing tool. And that's about as convincing as the rest of the excuses we've been hearing. After reading through all of these reviews and the responses to them, I honestly have a hard time understanding why some people are so eager to identify themselves with this community. Looking at it from the outside, the discussion often comes across as far more hostile than it needs to be. What stands out isn't just that people disagree. Every fan community has disagreements. It's the way some conversations immediately shift away from the game itself and toward attacking the person giving the criticism. Instead of debating the points being made, too many replies boil down to accusing reviewers of whining, saying they didn't play enough, claiming they're fake fans, insisting the reviews were written by AI, or dismissing them as bots. That kind of reaction doesn't create the impression of a community that's confident in the product it's defending. From an outsider's perspective, that's not exactly inviting. If someone is curious about Sword Art Online, and their first impression is watching fans argue with every negative review instead of discussing the game's strengths and weaknesses, it's easy to see why they might decide to stay away. The conversation stops being about whether the game is a good game and starts becoming a contest over who can discredit the other side first. Of course, it's important not to paint every Sword Art Online fan with the same brush. There are plenty of fans who are perfectly capable of having reasonable conversations, accepting criticism, and acknowledging flaws while still enjoying the series. But the loudest voices often shape the public perception of a community, and when those voices spend more time dismissing critics than discussing the game itself, that's the impression they leave behind. Whether that's a fair representation of the entire fandom is another question. But if that's the behavior people encounter most often, it's not surprising that some outsiders come away thinking the community is far more combative than welcoming. That's not a reputation any fan base should want, and it's certainly not one that's going to encourage new people to give the franchise a chance. One thing I think some Sword Art Online fans could benefit from is learning how to separate criticism of a franchise from criticism of themselves. Those aren't the same thing. Someone saying they think the game is repetitive, overpriced, or disappointing isn't automatically attacking the people who enjoy it. They're sharing their experience with a product they spent money on. That's completely normal, and it's something that happens with every game, movie, TV show, or book. The problem is that some fans seem to treat every negative opinion as if it's a personal insult. Instead of asking whether the criticism has any merit, they immediately go on the defensive. Suddenly the reviewer is a hater, a fake fan, a bot, or someone who didn't play enough. The focus shifts away from the game and onto discrediting the person giving the review. That's not a healthy way to engage with criticism. Being a fan of something doesn't mean you have to defend every decision its creators make. In fact, some of the strongest fan communities are the ones willing to admit when a release falls short and push for something better next time. Wanting higher quality games isn't an attack on the franchise. If anything, it shows that people care enough to want it to improve. Not every criticism is going to be fair, and not every review is going to be accurate. That's true for every piece of media. But dismissing criticism outright simply because it's negative doesn't help anyone. If you disagree, explain why. Talk about the gameplay, the story, or the mechanics. Have an actual discussion. At the end of the day, people are allowed to like the game, and they're equally allowed to dislike it. That's how opinions work. A franchise doesn't become stronger by trying to silence criticism. It becomes stronger when fans and developers are willing to listen to feedback, acknowledge legitimate problems, and learn from them instead of pretending they don't exist. Will some of these fans take a step back, reflect on the criticism, and approach these discussions differently in the future? Maybe. But based on what I've seen, I'm not holding my breath. The pattern seems to repeat itself every time there's a controversial sword art online release. Instead of asking whether the criticism has any merit, the first reaction is often to look for someone else to blame. It's the reviewers. It's the haters. It's people who didn't play enough. It's bots. It's AI. It's fake fans. It's review bombers. There's always another explanation that avoids talking about the game itself. That's what makes these conversations so frustrating. Rather than engaging with the actual complaints, too much of the discussion revolves around explaining why the people making those complaints shouldn't be taken seriously in the first place. If that pattern continues, nothing really changes. The conversation stays stuck in the same place, the same arguments get recycled, and every new release risks producing the same cycle all over again. The healthier approach would be to accept that criticism is inevitable. Every franchise gets criticized. Every game gets criticized. The question isn't whether criticism exists. It's how people respond to it. If the response is always to blame everyone except the product, then there's very little room for meaningful discussion or improvement. Hopefully future releases give fans fewer reasons to argue in the first place. But if the default response to criticism remains dismissing the critics instead of engaging with what they're saying, I wouldn't expect these conversations to look much different than next time a Sword Art Online game launches. After seeing all of this, I'm honestly glad I'm not a Sword Art Online fan. I never have been, and after watching the reaction surrounding the game, I don't see that changing anytime soon. It's not even just the game itself that turns me away. It's the way some of the discussions play out whenever the franchise is criticized. Instead of seeing people openly debate the game's strengths and weaknesses, I keep seeing arguments that revolve around dismissing critics, questioning their motives, or attacking them personally rather than responding to what they're actually saying. That's not the kind of community I find appealing. I'd much rather be part of a community where people can disagree, criticize a game, and still have a normal conversation without every negative opinion turning into a fight. At the end of the day, everyone is free to enjoy whatever they want. If people love Sword Art Online, that's their choice. But after looking at the state of the discussion around the game, I have no interest in becoming part of that community. Based on everything I've seen, I'm perfectly happy remaining an outsider. And I guarantee there are probably Sword Art Online defenders watching this video right now. If that's you, thanks for proving my point. Seriously, think about the argument that's constantly repeated in this community. Ignore the hate. Don't engage with the haters. The franchise doesn't need defending. I've heard those lines over and over again. So if you truly believe that, why are you here? If criticism is supposedly meaningless, why click on a video criticizing the game? Why watch it? Why scroll through the comments? Why write a response explaining why I'm wrong? Why spend your free time trying to convince me or everyone else that the game is actually a masterpiece? That's not ignoring the criticism. That's engaging with it. That's responding to it. That's defending the franchise. It's the exact opposite of everything you've been telling everyone else to do. You can't spend years telling people to ignore criticism while actively seeking out criticism so you can argue with it. Those two positions don't go together. If the criticism truly didn't bother you, you wouldn't feel compelled to respond in the first place. You'd close the video and move on with your day. You'd be too busy enjoying the game to care what some random person on YouTube thinks about it. Instead, some people seem to make it their mission to patrol every critical discussion, every review, every comment section, and every video that dares to say something negative about Sword Art Online. And then they have the nerve to tell everyone else that they're ignoring the hate. No, you're not. You're doing the exact opposite. You're giving it your time, your attention, your energy. You're helping keep the discussion alive by participating in it. The irony is that by clicking on a video like this and feeling the need to argue with it, you're demonstrating exactly what I've been talking about this entire time. If Sword Art Online truly didn't need defending, there would be no urge to defend it. If the criticism truly didn't matter, there would be no urge to answer it. Your actions say far more than your words ever could. So if you're watching this because you're angry, typing out a long comment explaining why I'm wrong, or preparing to tell me to stop hating, you've unintentionally illustrated my point better than I ever could. You didn't ignore the criticism. You engaged with it. You defended the franchise. Exactly like I said you would. If you're actually looking for a game that's worth your time and money, go play Black Myth, Wukong instead. It's a game that feels like the developers genuinely cared about delivering a polished, high-quality experience rather than simply cashing in on the name of an existing franchise. Instead of spending $70 on trash games, you'd be much better off putting that money toward a game that actually earns its price tag. There are plenty of great games out there, and in my opinion, Black Myth, Wukong is one of them. The game is fantastic, and it's based on Chinese mythology, specifically the classic novel Journey to the West. Instead of relying on the popularity of an existing anime franchise, it builds an incredible world inspired by centuries of mythology, filled with memorable characters, legendary creatures, and epic boss fights. The combat is satisfying, the visuals are stunning, and the overall level of polish is in a completely different league. If you're looking for a high-quality action RPG that actually feels like it earned its price tag, Black Myth, Wukong is well worth checking out. Sun Wukong, also known as the Monkey King, is famously depicted in Chinese mythology with both of these attributes. In the classic novel Journey to the West, which is one of the most important works of Chinese literature, Sun Wukong rides a magical cloud that allows him to travel great distances quickly. He also wields a powerful staff known as the Rui Jingu Bang. This staff can change size according to his will and is a central element of his fighting prowess and abilities. These elements are integral to his character and his adventures in the novel. Yang Jian, also known as Erlang Shun, is a prominent figure in Chinese mythology and folklore. He is a deity associated with martial prowess and is often depicted with a third eye on his forehead, which grants him the ability to see through illusions and discern truth from falsehood. Erlang Shun is typically shown wielding a spear, or a magical weapon, and is known for his role in various mythological tales and legends. In mythology, he is sometimes depicted as a heroic figure who fights against demons and evil spirits, and his stories often highlight his bravery and skill in combat. He is also featured in several classic Chinese literary works and popular cultural references. Erlang Shun is often depicted with a black dog in Chinese mythology. The black dog, sometimes called Xiao Xianquan, is his loyal companion and is said to have extraordinary abilities. The dog is known for its keen sense of smell and its role in assisting Erlang Shun in his various adventures, particularly in tracking down and subduing demons and evil spirits. Wukong was made Buddha once. In Journey to the West, Sun Wukong does eventually attain enlightenment and is granted the title of Buddha. This transformation occurs towards the end of the novel. After a long journey filled with trials and personal growth, Sun Wukong is recognized for his spiritual progress and is given the honor of being a Buddha. This is a significant moment in his character arc, marking his transition from a rebellious and powerful being to a revered, enlightened figure. The Celestial Court is an important aspect of Chinese mythology. It represents the divine realm where the gods and immortals reside, and is often depicted as a grand, heavenly palace or court. In Chinese cosmology and mythology, the Celestial Court is ruled by the Jade Emperor, Yuhuangdadi, who is considered the supreme deity and the ruler of heaven. The Celestial Court is a central setting in many Chinese mythological tales and legends, including those in the classic novel Journey to the West. It is portrayed as a complex and hierarchical realm where various gods, goddesses, and celestial beings hold different ranks and responsibilities. The court is involved in numerous stories about divine governance, conflicts, and interactions with the mortal world. Wukong refers to Pig Bajie from the original story. Zhu Beiji, commonly known as Pigzi or Beiji, is a significant character in Chinese mythology, particularly in the classic novel Journey to the West. Zhu Beiji is one of the disciples of the monk Xuanzang, Tang Song, on his journey to retrieve sacred Buddhist texts from India. In the novel, Zhu Beiji is depicted as a half-man, half-pig creature with a voracious appetite and a tendency towards laziness and indulgence. Despite his flaws, he is a loyal companion to Xuanzang and plays a crucial role in overcoming various challenges along the journey. His character is based on earlier mythological and folkloric themes, where he is associated with both humorous and symbolic elements. Wukong creates clones from his hair. In Journey to the West, Sun Wukong has the ability to create clones or copies of himself using his hair. This ability is one of his many magical powers. By plucking a hair from his body and transforming it, he can create multiple copies of himself or even animate objects. This power is often used strategically in battle or to deceive his enemies. Sun Wukong's skill with this technique showcases his versatility and ingenuity as a character. Erlang has a huge axe. Erlang Shun is typically depicted with a spear or staff in Chinese mythology, rather than a huge axe. His most famous weapon is the Rui Jingu Bang, a magical staff that can change size and is known for its immense power. While some artistic depictions might vary, the spear or staff is the weapon most commonly associated with Erlang Shun. Wukong and Erlang transform into birds. In Journey to the West, Sun Wukong has the ability to transform into various forms, including birds. His shape-shifting powers are part of his extensive magical abilities, allowing him to assume different appearances for various purposes, such as espionage or combat. Erlang Shun, on the other hand, does not have a specific ability to transform into birds in the traditional mythological stories. His powers are more focused on his combat skills, his third eye, and his magical spear. While he is a versatile and powerful figure, bird transformation is not one of his noted abilities in classical depictions. Wukong gets a crown. Sun Wukong does receive a crown, but it's not a crown in the traditional sense. In Journey to the West, Sun Wukong is initially punished with a magical crown by the Buddha. This crown is actually a part of the Headband Sutra, which was given to him by the Bodhisattva Guanyin, Avalokiteshvara. The headband is placed on his head and is controlled by Xuanzang, Tang Sung, using a special mantra. When Xuanzang recites the mantra, the headband tightens, causing Sun Wukong great pain. This serves as a way to keep Sun Wukong in check and ensure his obedience during the journey. The crown symbolizes his discipline and the spiritual trials he undergoes, rather than serving as a traditional regal crown. In Journey to the West, Sun Wukong's story does not end with traditional death. After his rebellious actions in heaven, where he causes significant chaos and defies celestial authority, he is ultimately subdued and imprisoned under a mountain by the Buddha. This confinement lasts for 500 years, during which he remains trapped and reflects on his past behavior. Sun Wukong's redemption begins when he is released from his imprisonment to join Xuanzang on a pilgrimage to retrieve Buddhist scriptures. Throughout this journey, he demonstrates considerable personal growth, loyalty, and virtue, overcoming numerous trials and adversaries. His transformation from a troublemaker to a devoted protector is central to the story. By the end of the novel, Sun Wukong's journey culminates in his spiritual ascension. He is granted Buddhahood by the Buddha, marking his transition to a higher state of enlightenment rather than experiencing death. This elevation reflects his profound change and the ultimate resolution of his character arc. Stone on mountain remains lie within. In Journey to the West, Sun Wukong's remains are not merely under the mountain, but are actually trapped within the mountain itself. The mountain, known as the Five Elements Mountain, Wuchengshan, is depicted as a colossal and magical rock that encloses Sun Wukong, effectively imprisoning him within its stone. This imprisonment is a symbolic representation of his punishment and the weight of his defiance against the celestial order. It is not until Xuanzang, guided by the Bodhisattva Guanyin, arrives that Sun Wukong is freed from his confinement. The 6 senses of the great sage and 6 relics do not appear to be standard elements of traditional Chinese mythology. They seem to be more closely associated with specific adaptations or interpretations of Journey to the West, or possibly other modern retellings or creative works inspired by the story. In traditional Chinese mythology and the classic novel Journey to the West, Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, is known for his magical abilities and his rebellious nature, but the specific concepts of 6 senses of the great sage and 6 relics are not part of the original mythological texts. Mount Huagua, also known as Flower Fruit Mountain, is a significant location in Chinese mythology, particularly in the novel Journey to the West. In the story, Mount Huagua is the home and birthplace of Sun Wukong, the Monkey King. Mount Huagua is described as a beautiful and mystical mountain, abundant with flowers and fruit, and it is considered a paradise for the monkey inhabitants. It serves as a crucial setting for Sun Wukong's early life, where he gains his powers and eventually declares himself the great sage equal to heaven, before his later conflicts with the celestial realm. The mountain's rich and vibrant description helps establish Sun Wukong's origins and his connection to the natural world. Chapter 1. Black Cloud, Red Fire. Black cloud, red fire is not a term commonly found in traditional Chinese mythology. It does not directly reference any well-known myths or figures from classical sources. However, it could potentially be a creative or symbolic phrase used in modern adaptations, literature, or artistic works inspired by Chinese themes. In some cases, such phrases might be used metaphorically or allegorically to evoke specific imagery or concepts related to mythological or cultural elements. Wukong transforms into a peach. In Journey to the West, Sun Wukong does have the ability to transform into various forms, including inanimate objects. However, there is no specific instance in the original text where he transforms into a peach. His shape-shifting powers are used more frequently for turning into animals, people, or other objects to achieve his goals or deceive his enemies. Pluck hair and make an offer. In Journey to the West, Sun Wukong uses his hair-plucking technique to create various forms and objects, including making offers. One notable instance is when he uses his hairs to create clones of himself or to transform into other beings. In one episode, Sun Wukong plucks a hair to transform it into a small, magical item, which he then offers or uses to achieve his objectives. This ability showcases his versatility and resourcefulness. The technique is part of his broader magical skill set, which allows him to manipulate his form and create useful tools or duplicates as needed. The Keeper of Black Wind Mountain does not appear to be a traditional figure from classical Chinese mythology. It seems to be a title or character that might come from modern adaptations, creative retellings, or specific works inspired by Chinese mythological themes. In traditional Chinese mythology, various mountains and figures are mentioned, but specific titles like Keeper of Black Wind Mountain are not commonly found in classical texts. If this is from a particular adaptation, literary work, or popular culture, it might be a creative addition rather than a traditional mythological element. Guanyin Temple is associated with Chinese mythology, particularly through its connection to the deity Guanyin Avalokiteshvara. Guanyin is a highly revered bodhisattva of compassion in Chinese Buddhism and is known as the goddess of mercy. Guanyin temples are dedicated to Guanyin and are found throughout China and in other East Asian countries with significant Chinese cultural influence. These temples serve as places of worship and reverence, where devotees seek Guanyin's blessings for compassion, protection, and guidance. In Chinese mythology and Buddhist practice, Guanyin is considered a symbol of mercy and kindness, and the temple is dedicated to her play a significant role in the spiritual and cultural life of many communities. Bulgar boss fight. In Chinese mythology, there is no widely recognized figure specifically called Bulgard. However, the concept of bull-like creatures and figures with protective or formidable qualities does appear in various forms. One notable example is the bovine demon, also known as Bull Demon King, Niu Mo Wang, or Niu Mo Wang, who appears in Journey to the West. The Bull Demon King is a powerful demon with a bull-like appearance, known for his strength and antagonistic role against the protagonists, especially Sun Wukong and his companions. In broader Chinese folklore and mythology, bull-like creatures or figures can symbolize strength, protection, or agricultural significance, but a specific figure named Bullguard does not exist in traditional sources. If Bullguard is a term from a modern adaptation or creative work, it may be a new or reimagined concept rather than a classical mythological figure. In Journey to the West, Sun Wukong does not use a spell specifically called Immobilize. However, he possesses a range of magical abilities that can achieve similar effects. One of his most notable powers is shape-shifting, which allows him to transform into various forms. This ability can be used strategically to evade capture, create distractions, or trick opponents, indirectly leading to their immobilization. Sun Wukong is also renowned for his formidable combat skills, especially when wielding the Rui Jingu Bang, his magical staff. The staff can change size according to his will and is incredibly powerful, enabling him to subdue or immobilize enemies through sheer force and precision. His proficiency in using this staff in combat situations often results in immobilizing his foes. Additionally, Sun Wukong employs other magical techniques, such as creating clones of himself from his hair. These clones can be used to confuse or overwhelm adversaries, which can effectively immobilize them by diverting their attention or creating strategic advantages. While there is no specific immobilize spell in his repertoire, Sun Wukong's diverse set of abilities allows him to achieve similar results through a combination of magical and combat prowess. In Journey to the West, Sun Wukong does not transform into a golden cicada. However, the golden cicada is a significant character in the story. This character is the original identity of Xuanzang, Tang Sung, before he is reborn as a human. The golden cicada is a celestial being who, due to a curse, is reincarnated as Xuanzang to undertake the pilgrimage to retrieve the Buddhist scriptures. Sun Wukong, on the other hand, has the ability to transform into various forms, including animals and other beings, but transforming into a golden cicada is not part of his abilities. His transformations are usually used for tactical purposes, such as evading capture or battling enemies, rather than taking on the specific form of the golden cicada. In Journey to the West, Sun Wukong does encounter and fight various supernatural beings, including demons and spirits, but a specific fight with a wandering wight is not a central part of the story. The term wandering wight may not correspond directly to any particular figure from the novel. However, Sun Wukong's adventures are filled with battles against a wide range of mystical and malevolent creatures. He faces numerous demons and adversaries throughout the journey, each presenting different challenges. These encounters often involve his impressive combat skills, magical powers, and strategic use of his abilities. In Journey to the West, Sun Wukong does not wear a pilgrim's headband, but he does wear a magical headband known as the Headband Sutra or Tightening Headband. This headband is given to him by the Bodhisattva Guanyin Avalokiteshvara to help control and discipline him. The headband is a crucial element of Sun Wukong's journey with Xuanzang. It is enchanted with a magical mantra that Xuanzang can recite to tighten the band, causing Sun Wukong great pain. This serves as a means to keep Sun Wukong in check and ensure his obedience throughout the pilgrimage. In Journey to the West, Sun Wukong does indeed encounter and fight the White Wolf Demon, also known as Ling Suzi. The White Wolf Demon is one of the many adversaries Sun Wukong and his companions face during their journey. Ling Suzi is depicted as a powerful demon with a white wolf appearance. This encounter is part of the numerous challenges the pilgrims face on their quest to retrieve the Buddhist scriptures. Sun Wukong's battle with the White Wolf Demon showcases his combat skills and his role as the primary protector of the group, using his magical abilities and staff to overcome the demon. The White Wolf Demon is a representative of the many formidable and supernatural creatures Sun Wukong must confront throughout the journey, demonstrating the constant dangers and trials faced by the pilgrims. In Journey to the West, the celestial jade lotus pill does not specifically appear as a central element in the story. The novel is rich with various magical items, elixirs, and artifacts, but the celestial jade lotus pill is not one of the primary items mentioned in the classical text. However, the novel does feature a range of magical pills and elixirs with significant importance. For example, the Peach of Immortality from the Heavenly Garden is a notable item that grants immortality and is central to several plot points. Guangmo, also known as Guangmo or Guangmo King, is not a well-known figure in traditional Chinese mythology. The name does not correspond to any of the major deities, spirits, or mythological figures typically found in classical Chinese texts. Gourds, particularly in the form of magic gourds or celestial gourds, appear in Chinese mythology and folklore. One notable example is the Gourd of the Immortals or Magic Gourd, which is featured in various stories. In these myths, gourds are often imbued with magical properties. They can have the ability to contain or release powerful substances, hold magical items, or act as tools for transformation. For instance, in some stories, a magic gourd might be used to capture or release spirits or demons, reflecting its role as a powerful and versatile object. Gourds are also symbolically significant in Chinese culture, representing longevity, immortality, and protection. The shape of the gourd and its association with these qualities contribute to its presence in mythological narratives and folk tales. The blessed gourd is a notable magical item in Chinese folklore and mythology. It appears in various stories and is often associated with divine or supernatural properties. In traditional accounts, the blessed gourd is sometimes linked to immortality, protection, or the ability to contain and control powerful entities. In one popular tale, the blessed gourd is a gift from a celestial being or deity, and it has the ability to capture and imprison demons or evil spirits. The gourd is often depicted as having magical properties that make it a valuable and powerful artifact in the context of the story. The gourd's symbolic significance in Chinese culture, as a container of supernatural power or as a tool for controlling and overcoming adversaries, aligns with its portrayal in various mythological and folkloric narratives. Luojia Fragrant Vine is a figure from Chinese folklore and mythology, particularly associated with the Journey to the West narrative. Luojia Fragrant Vine is a magical plant with the ability to create illusions or control individuals' actions, often used by demons or supernatural beings in the story to deceive or entrap their foes. In the context of Journey to the West, Luojia Fragrant Vine is typically portrayed as a tool or weapon used by antagonists to challenge the protagonists. It is not one of the central elements in the story, but serves to highlight the range of magical items and powers encountered throughout the journey. The plant's abilities add complexity to the narrative and provide additional obstacles for Sun Wukong and his companions. The use of magical plants and herbs in Chinese mythology often symbolizes nature's power and the interplay between the natural and supernatural worlds. Luojia Fragrant Vine fits within this broader theme, illustrating how such elements are woven into the rich tapestry of mythological storytelling. Shen Monkey, also known as Shun Ho or Divine Monkey, is a figure from Chinese mythology and folklore. Shen Monkey is often associated with Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, particularly in some regional variations and later adaptations of the Journey to the West story. In traditional Chinese mythology, Sun Wukong is the most famous monkey figure, known for his magical powers, including shape-shifting and his ability to wield the Rui Jingu Bang, a magical staff. Shen Monkey, as a divine or mythical monkey, shares some thematic similarities with Sun Wukong, including his association with monkeys and supernatural abilities. However, Shen Monkey is not as prominent or widely recognized as Sun Wukong in classical texts. Instead, Shen Monkey appears more in regional folklore, modern adaptations, or interpretations that draw on traditional motifs. And characters. Winterclad Noble does not appear as a widely recognized figure in traditional Chinese mythology. However, The concept of beings transforming into part fish is not uncommon in Chinese folklore and mythology. In various mythological traditions, there are numerous tales of deities, spirits, and mythical creatures with the ability to shapeshift or exhibit characteristics of different animals. For example, the Dragon King of the Seas, who rules over the oceans and rivers, often has associations with aquatic forms, though he is not part fish but a full dragon. The celestial Tai pill is not a standard element of traditional Chinese mythology or classical literature like Journey to the West. However, the concept of a magical pill with celestial or divine attributes is not unusual in Chinese folklore. In various Chinese myths and Taoist traditions, there are numerous references to magical elixirs or pills that confer immortality, enhance powers, or possess other extraordinary qualities. For example, the Peach of Immortality is a well-known item in Journey to the West and other mythological narratives, offering eternal life to those who consume it. Black Wind King, also known as Hei Feng or Black Wind, is a figure from Chinese mythology and folklore. He is often depicted as a malevolent spirit or demon associated with storms and wind. In some stories, he is a powerful and fearsome entity, while in others, he might be more of a trickster or an antagonist. The Black Wind King appears in various classical Chinese literary works and folk tales, sometimes as a character who brings chaos or misfortune. His role and characteristics can vary depending on the source and the specific region in China. Sun Wukong can use the cloud step or cloud walking technique in Journey to the West. This ability allows him to travel through the air on a cloud, moving swiftly from one place to another. Specifically, he uses a magic cloud known as the cloud somersault or somersault. The cloud somersault is a crucial part of Sun Wukong's abilities. He can travel great distances in a single leap, covering 108,000 miles in one somersault. This power enhances his agility and speed, making him a formidable opponent and a valuable asset on his journey with Xuanzang. The cloud step or cloud walking technique is one of Sun Wukong's most iconic abilities, showcasing his mastery of magical and supernatural skills.